I'll be painting this scene right here, and it's fairly complicated for me. Most architectural scenes are not that easy, and the reason is that an architectural object will have a lot of various values in that shape. Here's my final painting, and as you can see, it's very simplified, and yet most of the details are very apparent. All the important details are there, and I think that's the main thing, is that you have to find a way somehow to suss out the important details, and that isn't as easy as you might think. Here's my preliminary sketch, and I just very roughly jotted down the basic shapes, and I did use a Sharpie in this case, and I have been using a Sharpie. And if you paint thinner, I recommend not using a Sharpie, but if you paint really thick, as I'm doing here, feel free to use some permanent marker of some type. I'm putting in the sky with a palette knife, but the main idea here is that I'm squinting as I look at the scene. Now, squinting is a way to simplify what you see. I was painting in the shadow of a granite building, so I was getting a lot of reflected blue light into that shadow. So the paintings will appear to be shifting, but it's just the light that's changing. But I start to really roughly apply some of my darker pigments. That's probably the easiest shape to see when you squint. Now, when you squint, you should be able to squint so that you can see, your basic darks. That's the easiest place to start. Another important way to simplify is to focus on just 3 value zones. Now, in this painting, I'm putting in darks, lights, and middle values. Now, there's some modulation of values within those zones, but basically I'm trying to focus just on mixing up light, dark, and middle values. Now, the background mountains, as you can see here, are basically a very light value. And when I squint, I don't really see a lot of detail up in those mountains. So I just suggest the illusion of detail by using a lot of broken color. I do see some greens and some sort of distant tans that read as a kind of a pink. So I'm going to put those in as broken color. But what you want to do is you want to mix up your lights just so you can see some value in it. If your lights are so light that they just basically look like slightly tinted white, you've gotten your color too desaturated. You need to have your color be a little bit more, saturated and darker. So as you can see here, I'm just slowly adding more detail. Now, the color of the trees is mostly in the light part there, and I've just blocked that in with some nice broken color. Now, it's true that you can notice some value modifications within the basic zones. For example, in the white part at the top of the steeple, there's some fairly contrasty values there, and that is one of the places where you will see contrasting values in white. So you try to not focus on that aspect of it and focus on the basic shape of the building. The basic value of the building, except for the dark notes, is the middle value. So just keep focusing on the 3 values as a means to simplify, and then go back in and add some highlights. The trees are basically 2 values, a dark and a middle value. The building is basically a middle value with some high values and some dark values as accents. So don't get too bogged down in the slight anomalies to this rule. you have to use the rule as a way to simplify, and then you can add a small amount of detail at the end. Now, if I'd added a lot of value shifts in every zone, for example, way up in the mountains, I went back and added some whites into the sky, towards the sky as snow. If I'd gone overboard with that and made those value shifts really pronounced, maybe adding some deep, deep shadows, those would have started competing with the darks and lights in the foreground, and it wouldn't have read right. The same goes for the foreground. I know some of you are probably thinking that this painting has a lot of value shifts in those value zones, and that's true, but try to focus on the basic idea behind the painting, and I think you'll find it easier to proceed and improve with your plein air painting. One thing I do want to point out is that the light shapes, generally speaking, are much lighter than you would think. So lighten them up as much as you can and still have a deep, deep saturated color, and I think you'll be good with the lights. With your darks, you want to mix up a color that is quite dark but partakes of the color of that shape. For example, in the top of the steeple, I made that dark very cool because it's going to be partaking a lot of the coolness of the sky. Now the darks in the trees, I want to have some cools and some warms. So if you mix up your color too dark, it will just appear as black. So you want to do the same thing with your darks as you do with your lights. You want to have it appear to be dark, but you want to have color in there. In other words, if it looks black, it's too dark, and you need to bring up the value, add some white into that, so that you can see the color in that stroke. Your middle value colors will be the most saturated of all. That'll be your richest pigment and richest hues. So the idea is you give the illusion of darkness, even though that color must remain saturated. It must be some color in that. You give the illusion of lightness in your lights by mixing up tones that are still colorful, and they are not lacking or they're not whitish. So in this painting, and this is the final painting right here, we see some nice dark accents in the trees, some dark accents in the building, and in the mountains it's almost a flat tonality. The key to painting successfully outside is simplification. You just have to make things simple in order for that scene to read effectively and you to be able to paint it in a short amount of time.